I'm Lindsay Konzak with Modern Distribution Management and MDM.com, and I'm here speaking with Al Bates of Profit Planning Group. He is the author of Triple Year Profit, a book that is available on MDM.com. Welcome, Al.
Glad to be here.
One of the themes in your book is that only a small percentage of distributors generate the profit they should. You argue it is only 10%. Why is that?
That's a great question. Nobody wants to make less money than they should, but a lot of firms are doing that. 90% of the firms are doing that. And I've been looking at the issue for about 5 years, and I finally come to a couple conclusions. One is there are really two elements that we need to understand. The first is that while the differences between profitability for the typical company and the really good company is great, the differences in terms of the profit drivers that produce that profit are really small, incredibly small. There's an old romantic ballad, which nobody listening was alive when it was recorded, but it was called Little Things Mean a Lot. Wonderful concept in romance. Little things mean a lot. Same thing's true here in finance. There's a very few small changes that if we make correctly result in huge differences in profit. Now, before I go on with that, let me just make a quick baseball analogy, if I could. The difference between a 300 hitter who gets a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract and a 250 hitter who gets traded is one more hit a week. Not one hit a game. One hit per week. That's incredibly small. The same thing's true in profitability. The successful firms do a little bit better on each of the key profit drivers, and the result ends up being a huge difference in profitability. Now, the second thing that they do is they focus on these key profit drivers and don't let anything else get in their way of managing. As you well know, we get busy. There's millions of emails. There's phone calls. People don't show up for work. There are accidents. There's all sorts of things. The high-profit firms cut through that clutter. They focus relentlessly on the key profit drivers, almost to the exclusion of anything else.
So in this process of doing a little better and focusing on what is important, is lack of budget a problem?
It can be. Some firms don't have a budget. Unless you're a very small firm, not having a budget's terrible. If you're a small firm, one person knows everything, so it's not a real issue. But if it's a larger firm, then having no budget means you don't know where you're going. However, to generate a really high profit, a budget is not even close to good enough. I like to say that having a budget gets the firm all the way up from terrible to bad. Now, I hate to sound like I'm getting anti-budget in my old age, but I guess I kind of am. The problem is that the budget is usually 75 line items, and it takes forever to do it. We spend weeks on it. We spend months on it, worry about every single number. Then as soon as we get into the year, and there are any deviations to the budget, which there always are, the whole thing tends to be forgotten. It's a real waste to me. I mean, it's just you do a lot of work for no results. Now, what I think companies need is what I call a management plan. And the management plan says we send the accountants out of the room, send them on retreat, and management gets together and puts together an incredibly simple plan. Only decision makers are involved in this because they're the ones that have to run the business. So the question is, what's a management plan? How is that different from a budget? To me, a management plan has three essential components. Component number one, management has to start the year with saying, how much profit are we going to generate? That's what's called profit first planning. It's extremely controversial, incidentally, that how can you plan profit before you know sales and everything else, but that's what you have to do. If top management has to deliver the profit, top management has to set the goal. It needs to be set before anything else, and that's really one of the keys to me in terms of this concept of having a management plan. The second real item in a management plan is that there are four elements that need to be planned to drive that profit result. Okay, we've set a profit goal. Now we have four elements that determine whether or not we get there. There's sales, gross margin, payroll expenses, and non-payroll expenses. So I have one sales factor, one margin factor, two expense factors. The thought process here is, how much do we have to sell to generate the profit? Okay, we already know how much we want to make. How much do we have to sell? Also, how much margin and how much expense. How do we get to that profit plan? It's fairly simple conceptually, but it requires a lot of thinking about the issue. And then the third and final component is every one of the 4 profit drivers, sales, margin, 2 expense categories, have to be backed up with 4 or 5 specific things the company's going to do to make the drivers come true. So we're really starting with how much profit, how are we going to get there, what do we do to make that come true. So if we're going to increase gross margin, as an example, and most companies kind of like to do that if they could, how are we going to increase gross margin? Are we going to have more service? Are we going to change prices on some key items? Exactly what? Very specifically. The same thing has to do with expenses. Are we going to focus on lower cost of service accounts? Are we going to do some changes in terms of our account mix? How are we going to make this come true? Again, it's a very straightforward process and actually a very simple process, focusing on the issues that are really essential. Now, after this is set, you bring the accountants back in and you tell them, turn this into a wonderful 75-line budget. The budget then adheres to the management plan, plan first, budget second.